The Avatar can be reborn, but you can't, Kyoshi. And I don't want to give you up to the next generation. I couldn't bear to lose you. FC Yi, The Rise of Kyoshi. Bending Not Breaking, Avatar Legends, and The Rise of Kyoshi. Welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. This is season 8 of the podcast. We've done 7 podcast seasons. We did a full 3 seasons of ATLA. We did 4 seasons of Korra. We've talked about all kinds of seasons of the Dragon Prince, but this is season 8 of Bending Not Breaking, and I am so grateful that you all are still here listening to this. It's been a real joy, and I'm excited for this next kind of turn for the podcast. I have been wondering how we were going to proceed and whether we were going to proceed. And frankly, there's a lot of cool stuff coming out. We know that Netflix's live action Avatar is coming out in February. We know that Avatar Studios is pumping out things soon. We know that the Dragon Prince is coming out for season 6, probably in the spring. There's a lot of really cool things happening. And I was like, how do we turn like the podcast into something that is going to, what are we going to do while we wait for those things? And right now I'm leaning towards talking about the Kyoshi novels and going through those while we are kind of in wait for these bigger projects that are coming out. And I'm really excited because I have a friend who is going to join us today to talk about the Kyoshi novels, but also about some other cool things that we've been doing. And so before we do that, I want to normally, when we are talking about the show, we presume that everyone has watched all of the episodes and is familiar with everything. And that's less true with the Kyoshi novels and the fan base. And so I'm going to just preempt this conversation by saying we are presuming that you have read the Kyoshi novels today and in our future episodes covering the book. And so either that or you just don't mind spoilers. Funny thing, it's been proven that spoilers don't necessarily ruin the consumer experience. Sometimes they enhance it. So FYI. So if you want to avoid those spoilers, you can listen to the front half of the episode while we talk about Avatar Legends, and you can dip out when we switch over to Kyoshi. But for now, I'm excited to welcome our guest. Our guest today is Brooke Newhart, uses she, they pronouns, and is a fan of Avatar, an excellent artist. Yeah, you heard it, folks. Artist, creativity. And not only are they creative in their, artistic endeavors, but they are also an artist when it comes to playing a character on Avatar Legends. They think about their character so often that they dream about the lines they want to deliver in the game. And she has also read the Kyoshi novels, and I am thrilled to welcome Brooke. Brooke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. How are you today? I know that like I said that, so it's 10 o'clock where we're recording, and you were like, that's kind of early. How are you faring this morning, considering the time?
I'm doing the best I can. Had a late night last night, but I'm just bundled up. I brought my bed with me. So I'm full of blankets right now.
Love it. That is totally lovely. Well, I'm thrilled that you are willing to bear the 10 o'clock in the morning time frame for us. It's going to be a really neat episode. But tell us a little bit about you so that our listeners can kind of get a frame of reference for what makes you you.
Ooh, that's that's a lot to ask.
You'll be
I
fine. I believe in you.
I like to draw. I like Avatar. Um, I like to garden and live out in the country. And I really like cats. And those are all of my interests.
That's it. That's everything.
Yep.
You also read. You like I when I heard what you liked to read, I was surprised. I was like, oh, interesting. So what tell us a little bit about that too.
I like a lot of horror novels.
Yeah.
Um, like
What is that?
like like to be disturbed. And then I also read a lot of YA to not be disturbed and to come down from all the awful books.
Fair, a lot of the YA can be disturbing too.
True.
The dystopian uh hellscapes that seem a little bit too close to home. But amazing. Okay, so we like to garden, we like to draw, we like to do all the things. Um, I'm interested in kind of picking your brain around just like when did you first come across Avatar? Were you an early adopter? Did you find it late in life? What is your Avatar experience?
Not an early adopter. My family didn't have cable growing up, so I didn't watch it until it was posted online in the late 2010s, I guess. Um, so high school and college, I went to a dry university with no party scene, and so my friends and I would all get together and just rewatch Avatar and drink chocolate milk, and that was like our Friday night plans throughout
Sounds
all of college.
No, that's awesome. And did you were you like you watched it and rewatched it? So this
Oh
was
yeah.
a more than one time consumption kind of a deal.
It was like an every year rewatch.
Love that. Yeah, I get the feeling. I mean, I feel like a lot of adults nowadays would hear that. Like like oh, hot chocolate and Avatar party sounds really appealing. Um amazing. So I when we were Avatar Legends kind of just had come out and I was super interested in playing. And so I, of course, bought all of the materials, being like, if you build it, they will come. And I was going around to people who I knew played role playing games and also had any sort of interest in Avatar. And I found one, like I went to one friend knowing that there was interest there. And so that was easy. But then I was like, who else do I go to? And so I went to I was talking to someone. We all work in a restaurant. I was talking to someone in the kitchen because I knew he played D&D before. And one of the other people in the kitchen overheard and was like, I want to play. And I was like, great, we have a few people. And then I didn't even like consider you because I didn't think I knew that you were an Avatar fan. And also I didn't know that you were an RPG fan, a TTRPG fan. And eventually it was like, oh, hey, do you like Avatar? Um, and here we are. So I'm curious, just for people's understanding, what's your experience prior to playing Avatar Legends with this group? What's your experience with either D&D or TTRPGs, and anything along those lines?
I played a lot of D&D 5e in college. Um, Not great experiences. I never had any long running campaigns. A lot of maybe month long and then it fell apart. I tried DMing for some gals in my residence hall. Um, and it was fine. I liked it, but it just didn't work out. My experience with Avatar Legends has been much better, both I think as a system and just the group that we're playing with.
Yeah, our group is pretty stellar. Uh, okay, so we've been playing for 9 months. I feel like we started, I believe, what in
Last spring.
last March, I think. So it's been March, 9 months. Here we are. It's been 9 months. And we've been attempting to meet like every other week. And then, throughout, of course, 9 month period, people get sick and things along those lines. But we've been largely consistent and been able to, and I feel like that's where most our TTRPGs fall apart is like the battle is getting people to the table.
For
Um,
sure.
and something about this campaign and this story that we're telling is compelling enough to keep us coming back. And so I'm excited to kind of lean into that in a minute, but I also want to kind of brush up on briefly just that playing this game, I think, is what led you to reading the Kyoshi novels.
Oh, for sure.
Uh,
I read the Kyoshi novels because you told me I should read the Kyoshi novels.
well, it was one of those things where, so can you tell us before I know we're not there yet, but can you tell us just a little bit about the kind of create character that you created? And I can, which will, I think, give context to why I recommended you and pointed you towards the novels.
Oh, for sure. So Aizo is a very privileged elite son of the Fire Nation, and he is, I would say, a little more morally gray, gets very angry very easily, very stubborn, and sometimes feels like he's being dragged along by his friends to do good in the world, where he is a bit of a stick in the mud.
Yeah, that seems all entirely accurate for sure. uh so Aizo's family parents are like part of the Fire Nation military, and or I guess Aizo's father is. And we were encountering a like upscale event in our story, and you started asking a bunch of questions around like Fire Nation politics. And I was like, listen, the best place to get that is from the source. And there's a lot of Fire Nation politics in the Kyoshi novels. And so I pointed you there, and you were like, okay, here we go. And dove right in. And so briefly, like we'll touch on it a little bit more deeply later, but what was your experience kind of reading the Kyoshi novels?
I was really surprised by how more adult they were than Avatar.
Yeah.
Like it was a lot scarier right from the get-go.
Yeah.
There's a lot more like death, and maybe it's different reading it than seeing it on a show, just the way your brain perceives it. But I was a little shocked at the beginning, like, oh, this feels like a lot more grown-up experience than the cartoon show did.
Yeah, which is kind of wild. And I think one of the reasons I like that is it also kind of paved the way for Avatar Legends to be more serious too, for
Mhm.
it to kind of have a more, quote, adult theme to it. And I feel like we've kind of lived into that too in our story, which is really exciting. So I'm excited to touch on that. But now you've gotten a taste, listeners, for what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to now dive a little bit more deeply into just our experience with Avatar Legends. And kind of the point of this is one, to encourage everyone who's listening to see if you can find a way to play, because it's super awesome. And it's also very accessible to people who've not really dealt with RPGs before. The hardest part is getting people to the table. But okay, let's dive in. So I would love to kind of get broad strokes around your just experience with the game. And so uh can you, from your perspective as a player, tell us a little bit about the setting and like the big events that are happening in the world?
Mhm. Yes. So a nice part about Legends is you can pick which Avatar era you want to be in. So we're in the Roku era. Um, we are kind of dealing with the themes of the dragon annihilation, and we started out our group wanting to save the dragons and protect them, knowing that if we stuck with canon, we would eventually fail in our mission. Um, and yeah, we've been traveling around the Fire Nation and Earth Nation, trying to get information about the dragons and do what we can as a small group to protect them. And what I really like is that we have yet to actually encounter the Avatar in our storyline. We are pretty much in an Avatar-less world, even though everything else world building is still the same.
Yeah. So the Roku era, according to the Legends like rule core rule book, is right between when Sozin becomes Fire Lord and Avatar Roku's wedding. And so we're kind of in that space between where we're still early on in Sozin's leadership of the Fire Nation, and we're pre-wedding, which means Sozin is still not like technically a bad guy yet. We know that, you know, the Fire Nation is really, there's a lot of prosperity. Things are going really well in the Fire Nation. And that's often kind of attributed to Sozin's leadership. This is an unprecedented time of peace. And it's kind of wild because, you know, we have yet to encounter Sozin either. But a lot of the things that kind of happen in our story are like, why is this happening? Why is the Fire Nation still associated with all of these things? And because it's weird for us as a story to kind of get from A to B, knowing that in like 60 years there's going to be a genocide.
For
Right.
sure.
And
So
so
it's a bit of a it dampens our mood a little bit.
yeah, well, and it's one of those things where like, how do we live into knowing that's going to be true while also making it possible that, you know, Sozin's not the bad guy, right? And it's really interesting in terms of character creation and in terms of like overall big story things that are happening to like lay like, ooh, this is potentially what's going to lead to this later on. And it's kind of like, ooh, it makes me feel like, oh God, this is how genocide happens. And
Yeah.
we're laying groundwork for that. Not in the sense that we're not laying groundwork for genocide, but we are. That sounds weird. But what we're doing is kind of like illustrating the what it looks like. And frankly, it kind of feels a little close to home sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But anyway, so we're in the Roku era. We are working in kind of going back and forth between Earth Nation, Fire Nation, depending upon like some of the events that have been happening. Haven't even touched the water tribes, haven't gone near the air temples. And it's really interesting that our story has kind of really pulled us in these directions. So, of all the places we've explored, what has been your favorite place or the favorite area that we've kind of touched on?
I mean, gotta be Gao Chang.
Ooh, yeah,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
So one of our characters in the story came from a small town called Maizu Village, which is by all means just a very small farming community. And we wound up there following this dragon that we were trying to protect. And just really beaten down and needing to rest after this. Um, one of the members of our group just said, "Oh, well, come to my shed and we'll all hang out there." Turns out this shed is a secret earthbending elevator that took us down into the city of Gao Chang, a hidden city underneath the Earth Kingdom, where everybody who lives there is very secretive, does not leave this underground paradise, except for the villager who is in our group. And just one of those secret areas that a total surprise to everyone else in our group, and very different atmosphere from all the other places in the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation that we had visited before.
Yeah, it's what a cool place, right? In the
Mhm.
sense that, you know, as the person who, so I am GMing the campaign, and so I don't really have a character that I'm embodying or playing, but I got a call from one of our characters from this person, and he was just like, "So what if we just did this?" And I was like, "Let's do it." Like let's and he was like, "I don't really care about anything else other than I just want to pull this out of my pocket." And so he kind of left it to me to like do all of the planning for it. But it was one of those things where the idea of a secret city in the Earth Kingdom that is doing things differently, that's not necessarily living under the monarchy, that is kind of not in at this point in time, there's also two kind of monarchies. There's the Ba Sing Se monarchy, but also there's the Omashu. And so right now, politically, those two are kind of monarchical rivals. And we kind of got to separate ourselves from all of that because they were secret, right? Like, and so this whole thriving city is at once kind of operating in a place where we're doing things better than the Earth Kingdom is. And it was this kind of like socialist, everybody supports everybody experience, and we got to kind of live into like a society that's like, oh no, this is a really neat concept.
Yeah, and it's really nice in contrast to the Fire Nation where everything is super patriotic. Um,
Yeah,
Everyone following the set monarchy. Just a great contrast to see how differently things could go in different areas.
yeah, this just a glimpse of what could be instead of the the capitalist. uh
Mhm.
yeah, it's wild. But anyway, that was a really cool setting. I think that's been a really fun thing to kind of live into. And of course, Maizu Village is on the map of like a canon map for the Avatar world up in the northwest portion of the Earth Kingdom, right by the Stone Fingers. And it's really neat to kind of think about what capacity there is for like fans of the world to create, right? And to really begin to own some of the creativity of the world of Avatar and be good stewards of what is possible in the world,
For
um,
sure.
which has been neat.
Yeah, I was really grateful that you were DMing as someone with extensive knowledge about the world building that felt like an easy leader. Um, but it's also nice that there's so much open and so many different directions that you can go. There's nothing like requiring that you stick to canon, and it's just gives you a great like open world to build your own thing in.
Yeah, and that was one of our early discussions around how we wanted to kind of play this game was, do we want to follow canon, right? And the group basically said mostly.
Mhm.
And so it was one of those things where we have been doing our best to live into like, we're not going to do anything that's not impossible in the world. We're also going to realize that this is the timeline that we're following and the big events are happening, but the smaller things and the other in-game things, we were kind of able to be free in things like that. So that's been really neat. So you've told us a little bit about your character, about Izo, and I'm curious, like when you were in character creation mode, like why Izo? Why did you want to play this character?
I wanted to do a more morally gray character, and also I was kind of thinking of more of a background character. I picked for Izo to be a non-bender because at the beginning I was nervous that I didn't have the creativity to role play bending and do something really cool. Um, I figured everyone else will want to play benders, so I'll stick to the back and I'll make a character who's very reserved, very serious, very stick in the mud, so that I, as the player, would not be expected to be funny or creative. And as I've gotten more comfortable, I think we've broken out of that a bit more, and Izo is more sassy as we've gone along.
That is true. Yeah.
um, but I liked that. he had a lot of commitments to his family, even though his family is not doing what is right most of the time. He's drawn
That
in multiple directions.
that kind of brings me to the question of one of the cool things about this setting, this play style, is that it's called Powered by the Apocalypse. And so that is, instead of D&D, it's Powered by the Apocalypse. And so it provides us with a set of rules that we live into. And one of the cool things about Avatar Legends is it utilizes a thing called playbooks. And playbooks uh, in Avatar have a balance spectrum, right? It's all about balance. And each character playbook has two values that they are really kind of struggling between. And so in your creation of ISO, when you were looking at all these playbooks and looking at all these values, you chose a specific one. So what did you choose, and what are the values, and why did you think that those kind of aligned with this, stick in the mud that you've picked?
Yeah, so Izo is the guardian, and his two values are self-reliance and trust. Which I think is every playbook character is drawn between those between two kind of not conflicting, half working together values.
Yeah.
And it makes it really easy to role play because you're giving your characters motivations right up front, and they also give you personality aspects that you can play into. But I liked self-reliance and trust as Izo's values because he could rely on his team and go with the flow when needed, but he also lets him be stubborn and kind of helicopter mom in a way.
Yeah.
I think is a big aspect. The Guardian is largely a support character who picks a ward out of the group that they want to protect, and you can role play that however you want. Izo is very committed, possibly to an unhealthy point, in being a helicopter mom to someone in the group, and yeah, it
Well,
is sometimes a hindrance and sometimes a help.
Well, it's so fun too because a lot of things happen when your ward listens to you and when they don't. And they have a little bit of agency in terms of it affects your mood, it affects everything kind of about how you play when they put themselves in danger without consulting you, when they do things without kind of your awareness. And uh, it was so fascinating the first, probably what, 5 or 6 episodes that we participated in. You had one person, and it really grew your bond game wise to the point where when that shifted, it was a big deal when your ward shifted in our game. Right. It was a huge experience for, I think, the entire group. And it was I kind of think about it. I'm like, oh my God, it was like, oh, the other person's growing up. They're able to take care of themselves now. It was just a really neat way to watch that evolve. Does that resonate with you too? Does that seem right, or is that just
For
me?
sure. It enabled a huge role play moment. And I think that's the best thing about the system is everything it's the whole formula is made to enable really easy role play. Just all the systems, whether it's personal characters or the personal playbooks or the mechanics of the game, are just made to facilitate role playing and to give you a guideline of how you can go about building in important and special moments kind of in that Avatar way to touch into the emotions and to get down to your core values.
Yeah. Well, it's really fascinating for me. Like when you watch certain episodes of Avatar, especially later on, I think about the episodes where like Toph and Katara are fighting
Mhm.
and things are like everybody's like antsy and on edge. And by the end of the episode, everybody's apologized and said that they're sorry and they've made up and they've kind of worked with one another and everybody feels better at the end of the show. The role playing game is designed for that too, where tension is built up between characters, and then there are mechanisms in game that allow those things to diffuse, and the game encourages that, and it is those are my favorite moments.
Me
The
too.
moments when uh, I love the losing our like when you lose your balance often what happens is you do things that are outside of your value or your value is so if your value like yours is self-reliance you are doing something that is so living into that principle that it feels extreme
Mhm.
and you run away or you do X, Y, and Z. And it becomes this huge moment in game that then needs repair, right? It requires everyone else, if we want to continue working together, to repair that moment. And those are just my favorite. The both the big extreme moment and then the repair after are by far my favorites.
For sure. There's a lot of how do I walk back from this? Which
Yeah.
is a part of life that is maybe not my favorite, but is really fun in a game.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like it. I was like, it took our group a long time to get comfortable. There's a mechanic in game called Guide and Comfort, and our group we've been playing for 9 months, and it felt like the first 3 months we just did not do it. We weren't good at it. We tried it. It was like those were still some of the best moments, but we still were hesitant and like, I don't know about this but it feels like that has become such a thing that we do now that is it feels like every episode well guys it's time for this it's time for our guide and comfort session and it feels like those moments are coming easier to us and what that has done is it has made the storytelling better.
For sure. I think that even in role play, it's hard to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a practice skill, and guiding and comfort is definitely being vulnerable as a character and helping others. And I feel like I look for those moments in my day-to-day life more after practicing it in game. I'm like, oh man, how could I be more vulnerable in my real life?
This is my point. This is why we're talking about this, is because like this is why this game is so cool. And there's actually most of the people who are listening to the show know that I am uh practicing and in school to become a therapist. And there's a training out there by like some company that is training GMs to do kind of like be informed by like certain therapeutic modalities in their GMing. And I'm sitting here going like, give me that training. That sounds amazing. Because like it tells you like this is how you build a campaign. This is how you take advantage of these conversations. And I'm like sitting over here going like, as I see it happening on our game when we're playing, when we're doing these things, it's incredible practice for people in real life. Like this is what a joy it is to watch people say, hey, I really screwed up and I'm sorry. And giving people practice and language and it's so cool. It's so real. And I think that's why I like it so much is because those moments feel authentic, right? It's wild to me how cool that is. So I really love the game. um, yeah, it's a really interesting way to at once escape from the real world, but also practice. for the real world in a, like, right? It's what a weird concept to think about.
Yeah. And like all the detriments, like instead of like hit points, you get more tired and then you take conditions which are just bad moods. So
Yeah.
your character will be angry, will be insecure, um, will be nervous, and those are just feelings that you have to practice role playing that you then walk back and like see how to recover from.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. Ah. Okay. So I've kind of we've talked on this, at least from my perspective, and it sounded like you agreed, but I'm gonna ask the question anyway. But do you have like favorite parts of playing the game? Like these are the moments that you live for when you're playing the game?
Oh, exactly what you mentioned. It's when a character loses their balance and does something extreme, and then the walking it back and the vulnerable moments of guiding and comforting. Best part.
And it's so interesting too, because that is what everybody seems to like, but also it's what everybody tries to avoid.
It's
Isn't that true
difficult.
though? Right? Like everyone's trying not to lose their balance, and everyone's actively working and trying their best to avoid the need to walk back and be vulnerable. And yet, those are the moments that everyone really kind of vibes off of. And in my head, I'm like, is that true in real life too? Is like, are those the moments that make life worth living? Is that accurate? Is that an accurate statement? Like, I don't know, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I love the moments of vulnerability in real life where just the comfort and the recovery. I still think personally I would rather not have a huge moment of regret to look back on.
Yeah. Well, it's so wild because what makes a good story are those big emotional beats. And I'm wondering if our lives are similar, where it feels like I like part of me wonders if living this, oh, I'm going to totally never take any risks and I'm not going to do anything leads us to, sure, we're staying in balance, so to speak, but we are also not experiencing what it's like to lose our balance. um and so it's an interesting question, right? That makes me question what and whether how it's making me question how I want to live my life, honestly. Is like, do I want to take more risks and get closer to losing my balance to explore whether that's the way that I want to live, or I don't know. It's super interesting.
For sure.
Um which begs the question then, since this game is so fun, but also fun in such a way that it's like making me think about how to live our lives. I'm curious, what have you learned about yourself through playing this game for 9 months?
Um, I get invested a little too easily. The is the big one. There are sometimes where other characters would really foil my goals in the game, and I
Yep.
would have to remind myself in day-to-day life that I am not mad at the player and my friend in real life that my character is mad at their character in the game. That I should not be terse to them at work because of our role playing scenarios.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. Oh, I can think of several examples of that. That's phenomenal. Um, I'm curious, you've learned a little bit about yourself too. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about the way that you've played the game is um, there have been a few times where Izo has, and I think this is true to the character, where you, Brooke, have thought about how Izo would respond to certain things. And it's not until 6 sessions later that that comes out. But what happens is that's also true for Izo. It may be, 6 hours in game, but in like 6 weeks out of game, but you have really kind of honed and crafted some one-liner zingers that Izo has said that has kind of dropped the party, like where we had to pause for a moment to process what Izo has said. And I'm curious what it's like for you to kind of really get into the character for so long and hold on to the character's resentment for right, like, but honestly, like, that seems what it's like, and I'm curious what that's been like.
I think in real life, something that me and Izo have in common is the how quickly he goes to anger. And that's anger is an emotion that I am very practiced at in real life. Um and the way that I role play Izo is usually what is easiest for me to access.
Mm,
And while I do not want to be a resentful person in real life, it is those kind of mean, snarky things come easiest to me. Because maybe that's how my brain is wired. But it is nice to role play and practice walking down from those moments and seeing how it affects the other characters in game.
yeah.
Kind of as a way to guard me against from doing that in real life. Yeah. My I I think is a healthy practice.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. And again, it's been those moments that have like made the game so exceptional. So I've
Thank
loved
you.
that. So do you feel like your knowledge and or understanding of or I guess perception of Avatar has changed since playing the game?
Oh, from now on, I constantly look at the characters and want to figure out what their two values are and what their balance,
Yeah.
um, what their balance track is. Because I had never thought of the characters in the show as that way.
Hmm.
But now I constantly see everyone in the lens of what two feelings are they fighting between? Um, is this a lose your balance moment? How are you going to walk this back? It's really easy to see the show and all other media in the formula of the game now.
Yeah, it's wild. It's super cool. I do the same thing. I'm like, oh, this is a lose your balance moment. Oh, wow, this is a yeah, super cool. Amazing. And so you are also an artist, right? And want to capture that. And one of the coolest things that happened like really early on was after our first um kind of experience playing, you shot back and said, hey, this is this scene that we just did, and we got to see a picture, an image of what we just did. And what a cool thing. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And that was before I knew that you were, painting and drawing a lot.
Well, they're a great surprise for you.
It was. And you've also kind of sketched out a scene from most of our sessions, if not, completed a full um, picture. But what's it? Why do that? But also, uh, let's start there.
Just why?
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone has their own way of interacting with the things they like. I mean, you do a podcast. Um,
Yeah.
for me, I'm just a visual person, and um, drawing and getting to take the time to think about the campaign afterwards and to enjoy the moment saves me from talking everyone's ear off about like, oh, let me tell you what we did this time. So it's just another way to relive and enjoy um, our story um,
That's a
after
great.
the fact without just being like, we have to play again in 2 hours. Just keep going, perpetual Avatar Legends.
Yeah. Yeah. I like I think that's part of my dream is like, okay, let's take a vacation where all we do is play Avatar Legends and then take breaks to eat. Like, um, Yeah. Okay. So I kind of love that. Like it's a way to kind of remain in world, like almost, and like to continue to re-experience. Um, but also it kind of what it does for, I think for us, for who is not drawing, for those of us who kind of were participating in this and then get to see it reinterpreted in a different way, is often the scene you pick is the most emotional of the session, or like a big action scene, or like it feels like it's a high stress or high stakes moment usually. And it really kind of puts into perspective like, oh man, like that was a big, we had a wall of fire that we were dealing with in the middle of the street, and like that's what that would have looked like. And sometimes I feel like my brain doesn't process the literal image, um and so it's really nice to kind of see some of those things like, oh, that's what that would have looked like. That's more absurd than I thought it would have been, or like that's, you know what I mean, like more cartoony than I would have realized, in terms of like how it actually happened. So it's a really neat way for, um I often think about how this story that we've been telling has been, it's not like a perfect story for sure, in terms of like, it's not like watching this alongside Avatar: The Last Airbender, it would be not the same. But because of the amount of time and energy and living into these characters that we have invested into it, it feels, just as intense almost. Even though the stakes of the story and the beats of the story may not translate to like an actual show, but it's super cool. So, ah, what
Either
haven't we
way,
talked
you built a
about?
great world.
Yeah. What haven't we talked about in terms of Avatar Legends that we want to make sure we touch on?
I think we've about covered it.
Sweet. Um, well then that, folks, is my pitch for everyone to find a group that you can commit to. And again, I think it's another cliche example of you get out of it what you put into it, right? If you're willing to be vulnerable in the game, then it is going to pay some serious dividends in your story experience, and it's phenomenal. Um, so now what I want to do is, we on the podcast, as mentioned kind of earlier in the intro, are taking a turn into, over the next couple of months, thinking about what do we do. And I'm like, let's dive into Kyoshi. We've been thinking about it. We've been wondering whether this is the right move, and this seems like it's time to do it. And so you have read the books. You are one of the few people that I know in person that has read the books. And so I was really excited to be like, okay, this is somebody I know. This is someone we can talk about this thing. And now I'm ready. So with that in mind, you've kind of told us about why you started reading. I was like, hey, you should read this. But what kept you reading when you were reading the books and, starting, especially the first one? Um, what kept you reading?
There's a really great hook right at the beginning where I think from watching the show, Kyoshi is built up as this legendary figure, lived 300 years, one of the most powerful benders of all time. And just seeing the Kyoshi's origin story is something I never would have imagined. Um, and so just how unexpected it was really drew me in right at the beginning, that Kyoshi did not know she was the Avatar until she was like 16, and there was another person training to be the Avatar. Completely
Wild.
unexpected. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one thing where it's like that is dramatic irony at its finest, right? For people who are at all familiar with the show and with the books, or like just with anything Avatar, would know that Kyoshi is the Avatar, but like going into it and realizing, you're like, oh, how do we get from here to there? And it's not what you expect.
No, no, it's definitely not.
Yeah, so the hook in the beginning kept you reading. So um it's a wild, you mentioned earlier that it's like it is an adult
Yes,
experience, right? And I'm like, the themes in this book are very they are communicated in a very different way than the show. Like the show, uh ATLA was written specifically for 9 to 14-year-old boys. That was the target audience when it was for Nickelodeon. And we know that it is clearly reaching a larger audience than that. But it's really fascinating to think about, especially on like the resurgence of Avatar in 2020 with the pandemic. It kind of led to this boom of new watchers, new viewers, and a whole new group of people. But the books hit different.
for sure.
And I'm curious, when you kind of, if you were to name um like the big themes of the book, what comes to mind for you?
A really complex theme was grappling with your parents' choices and the choices of your predecessors. Because Kyoshi is abandoned by her parents as a young child.
Yeah.
And she later travels and finds her parents' friends. They were in a gang, and realizes that her parents still had the time and emotional capacity to care for another child around her same age, but they didn't take her with them. And it's just a very complex emotion for Kyoshi to see another boy that got the love and attention that she wanted from her parents. Um, and just that theme of how do you her parents have died, how does she reckon with their abandonment of her versus um the love that they showed to others? Like, are her parents good people, bad people? How
Yeah.
do they fit into her life now?
Yeah. And it's just wild to think about too, because this other character who grew up with the quote loving version of her parents is, looks down on Kiyoshi for thinking poorly of them,
Mhm.
right? So there's this dual sense of what you're saying is true to you, but what Kiyoshi is saying is true to her. And if these things are both true, how can that work? How can these things both be true?
For sure.
uh,
And they don't get an answer to that question because you can't ask Yoshi's parents now.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things I love about the book is it says, here's something that's true. Here's something that's true. Let's make that play together,
Mhm.
right? And I feel like that happens more than once, right? It's
For
these
sure.
these books are really good at making really complex relational dynamics that really make it so that you have to, it's like, again, it's, you see two sides to people, and they're very good at showing you both sides and making you do the work of deciding whether that person is quote good or bad, or, and when in reality we realize that it's not a binary, but it's just the fact that people are complicated.
Exactly. Another one of my favorites was the relationship between Yoon and Kyoshi. Yoon is the boy being raised as the Avatar,
Yeah.
and at the beginning, Kyoshi is his like personal assistant, like
Yeah.
his top servant, basically. Um, and as the story develops, and we get this inkling that maybe Kyoshi might have some link to the Avatar, and maybe Yoon can only be a really good Earthbender, there comes up this complex idea of who deserves what, because Yoon has been training and putting in all the work, and by all means, he really deserves to be the Avatar at that point, but
After
he's
that,
not.
like after all the shit that he went through and was
Mhm.
put through by other people, like, oof, yeah, it's
And
wild.
if he's not the Avatar, then what happens to him? And ah,
Yeah. Well, and it's in, I think what makes it so hard, the books, what makes the books really just like, oh, bummer. And it's bummer in like a really good storytelling kind of way, but a bummer also in like a that really sucks kind of way, is that like they could have been incredible friends, right? They could have worked together so well. And like he absolutely could have been like Kyoshi's number one, right? And it just like it makes, again, it's one of those things where it just makes so much sense why he reacts the way he does. And also it's just like it didn't have to be this way. And it's just like this big lament that is what makes those books so good. And so I'm really thrilled at the story. It really is phenomenal. Um, so as you kind of you I pointed you in this direction for we were getting into like Fire Nation clans and Fire Nation politics in game, and you were asking a bunch of questions. I was like, listen, you if you want to know as much as I do about these things, all you got to do is read the book. And you were like, okay. And you kind of walked away, and I remember you coming to the next session having read the book, and you were like, okay, this is how this is going to go.
yeah,
And
I
that's
think this
not
is
how it went.
a mean trick that you pulled on me, Ben.
Yeah, I loved it. It was awesome. But I'm curious, like I bring that up because I'm curious, after having read it, after having then negotiated those preconceived notions in game, um, I'm curious what thoughts or feelings after having read the books are still kind of lingering with you. What when like, in a random day during the week you think about the novel, what is the thought you think?
Um, I like to think about how history, historical narrative is kept. That's
Mm,
a big theme of the book and something that they bring up in bits throughout both novels. Are that the previous Avatar and his group, the things that they did, how they are remembered,
yeah,
and how they try to shape that narrative after the fact. Um, which, as we uncover, it's not all that it seems in the book. And I think that's just something that comes up day to day in how historical narrative is presented in the world.
yeah,
Um, a really clear parallel in the book that I get reminded of.
yeah,
It's in a more depressing sense of how we glorify really awful historical events in America,
yeah,
and then for individuals, um, how do you remember your predecessors who have done bad things? Like, do you still honor them? Do
mm,
you is this a forget it? It's a forget it and move on thing, or how do you live with the awful things that have been done before you?
yeah. That's so good. The complexity of, Yang Chen, widely considered as like the best avatar ever, and then we get Avatar Kuruk, who is largely considered to be one of the worst avatars. And then, of course, one of the things that these two novels do is kind of, uh, people in book also think that Kuruk was one of the worst avatars ever. And things start to emerge of like, oh, this is why he chose what he did. This is why he did this. And it's like, oh, And you realize that people tell stories a certain way to save face. You realize people tell stories a certain way in order to preserve a certain narrative. And it's really interesting to see how those stories make a big difference for people, and how they're told makes a big difference. And yeah, it's really frustrating when people use their power and privilege to change a narrative for their benefit, and all of a sudden you come across, oh, this isn't true. Like, my whole world is changing because of that. And again, the stakes of that become really evident in these books. So I think that's so true. Yeah. Oh man. So one of the things this podcast does is it attempts to learn from the media of Avatar, right? And so we've learned a lot from Aang and the gang. We've learned a lot from Korra, and now we're gonna theoretically dive into these books, and there's a lot to learn here too. And I'm curious, what are some themes in terms of like one word things that we might analyze and talk about moving forward? Like, for instance, the way we use lenses for the podcast to talk about specific episodes. What are some lenses we might think about for certain chapters, and not necessarily specific chapters like, oh, for chapter 7 you should totally do this, but just like general things that you would want to explore if you were to go through that practice.
I was thinking about this a lot before we started because it's really hard to distill it down into one word.
Right.
But the one that stuck out to me was obligation.
Ooh, we haven't talked about that before.
Because there's like the obligation that the Avatar has to the world, but there's also Kuruk and his gang at the time. After Kuruk has passed away, his friends are trying to keep on the legacy and like raise the next Avatar. And there's a lot of the theme of obligation with what do we owe Kuruk as we raise his next life, and kind of the obligations towards the dead versus the living.
Yeah.
It's just really shapes all the characters' motivations.
Well, it's also interesting too, because one of the other like big themes that you're making me think of is the human that is the Avatar versus the role of Avatar. And who how do you manage that? How do you raise a human that is like, you are your own person? You have feelings, you are a whole person. And you are also by birth and by this, tradition, this thing that is really, really intense and has a massive world obligation. And it's one of those things where, like, is there truly an obligation here, right? Or is this something that the world has grown to expect, that is an unfair expectation of this one person? And it's an interesting question, right? Because like part of me is like, they don't have to do anything. They are their own person. They're not required to do any of this. And yet they do, right? And maybe there have been avatars in the past that have not kind of risen to the role, but from all the ones that we know, in some way, shape, or form, they have risen to the role, risen to the call, so to speak. And it's an interesting, like, how do you balance the autonomy and individuality of the person alongside the giant expectations of the role? Which is one of the playbooks in Avatar Legends: role versus freedom. The icon, I think that is. Okay. I think that's the icon, but I digress. But yeah, it's I love this idea of obligation, and to whom are you obligated? To what are you obligated? Why? Who's saying that you're obligated? And so like there's a lot of questions around like, how does power and obligation work together? And there's a lot of cool things around that. That's a really neat word that we can definitely touch on. What's another one? Any others that came to mind?
Um, Jealousy in that that dynamic between Kyoshi and Lek with dealing with Kyoshi's parents.
Kyoshi and Lek, Kyoshi and Yoon, even you know, um, Ronki maybe. Like there's a lot of like little jealousy pockets happening for sure. Ooh, dang. So you're good at this. I'm gonna start doing that more often. Yeah.
um, Authority is another one,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of corrupt authority. We have a
Yeah.
lot of people viewed as heroes, who takes control of things versus um who deserves to be in control.
Yeah. That's a constant one too, right? Like the people in power versus the people that should be, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
story of the world.
Yeah, welcome to Human 101. um Yikes. Amazing. Okay. So I'm hearing that the overall consensus is that if you are a fan of Avatar, how do you feel like what is your comfort level in recommending to people who've watched the shows to read the books? Is it
Oh,
like
yeah.
10 out of 10 must read, 9 out of 10 it's different but you should definitely read it, 8 out of 10? Like I'm curious where, like, what's the thought process?
Yeah, I'd probably go 8 or 9 out of 10. I thought it was a great book. Definitely not for younger kids, but for an older audience. I think that the show stands on its own so well that you don't need anything supplemental for it. But if you really enjoy it, then it's a I think it keeps the feelings and what people like out of Avatar is still in these novels.
Mm, so good. Awesome. Well, we will eventually hit chapter 1 and you be looking out for it on the feed. And I'm excited to tap into these books finally. They've been out for a while now, and we've been kind of dancing around it, and we're finally approaching it. So here we go. Okay, that kind of is going to bring us to the near the end of our show, but we've talked about several things, and I would love to hold true to our podcasty things, which is to be grateful and have gratitude at the end of our show. So we've talked about quite a few things. Who is a character from either the Kyoshi novels or from your Avatar Legends experience that you are thankful for, and why are you thankful for that character?
I'm really thankful for Yoon from the Avatar
Ooh,
Kyoshi books.
that's a bold statement. Let's hear it.
Mhm. While he might not make some good choices later on, um, I enjoy seeing how he um how he deals with his friends who may get things that he wanted, that his expectations are ruined and he has a lot of downfalls, but how he tries to hold on to relationships and um well, it's maybe not take it out on the people that he cares for. Maybe.
Yeah. Oh, well, I am. Yeah, Yoon's an interesting choice. I think that like that's a really generous read, and I think it's true because it's one of those things where like I have so much compassion for Yoon, but like man, it's also like
I think it's easier to have compassion for him in the first book before
yeah,
the second one.
yeah. Um, but yeah. Anyway, I digress. I am super thankful for the absolutely the character. There's so many great moments where it's just like God, so good. Um, yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for in terms of our conversation today is, you know, one of the things that I've appreciated about playing this game over the course of a long period of time is, these characters start to become more real, perhaps, than you think they will be, or when you, especially like at the beginning of the game, it's like, okay, I created a character who I don't really care what happens to this person. And we talked about at the beginning, we set the ground rules of like, yeah, we can kill characters if we want to. And the stakes have gotten to the point where if a character dies, it's going to be a big deal.
Yes.
And I have really kind of grown with the weight of being in relationship with these characters. And one of the things I really appreciate about Izo in particular, and why I think I'm grateful for Izo, is we've seen real complexity from Izo in the sense of, you kind of addressed it. Like, he starts out as quiet and reserved and only speaking up when something's really going against and grating against his values. And it's gotten to the point where he's opened up to this group. We're starting to see a different side of Izo, but we're also seeing some of that vulnerability and some of that complexity in terms of like, oh, maybe this was wrong, and oh, maybe I was right all along. And that kind of investment in character and investment in story is just really incredible. So I'm really grateful for Izo, and in a way that I don't think I would have said at the beginning of our game. And so I'm really grateful for Izo, and what a fun character to have in a group.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So you are a super cool human, and people on our show might hear what you have to say and be like, ooh, I want to check out their art, or ooh, they seem like a fun person to pick their brain about creating a character, or ooh, how do I contact Brooke? How do I learn more? And so if you would like to be contacted, how would you like people to do that?
Instagram is probably the best way. My handle is at Brooke Newhart, BrookeNewhart.
There it is, folks.
I don't post as much art as I would like to, but I'm slowly working through trying to illustrate all of our sessions, and maybe I'll do a big image dump.
Showcase. Yeah. Amazing. Well, cool. You heard it here, folks. You can find Brooke on Instagram. You can also find our podcast and all of our cool things on Instagram and pretty much every other social media. And feel free to contact us, DM us, all the things. We are not super active in posting, but we do respond to DMs fairly quickly if you are not spamming us. And so check us out there. But the best place to check us out is on Patreon, where we have lots of cool things. We have a Patreon Avatar Legends game that's happening. We also have live episodes that happen from month to month, and you can find us there, and I highly recommend it. And that, folks, is the end of our show. Brooke, thank you so much for taking the time out of your relaxing Sunday to sit with me and talk about this. And everyone else, until next time, be well and do good.